Hello, hello again, and welcome back. You're still with me. Thank you. My name is Tomlin's Nyback. This is 365 Days to Racial Change. And we are moving right along. This is day 8 or 9. Starting to lose track. I've got a spreadsheet on it, so I'm doing my best with it just to get us up to speed. I really want to see if we can cover some material in this brief time. What informs us and what we're talking about is the position of black folks in white America. I'm not sure how to articulate what's going on here, but you'll get the gist if you stick around, and some ways to get beyond any oppression and stigmas and to live as free as white or white dominant American society. I'm informed by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson. He's my first book I read of his is a Black History Reader, 101 questions you never thought to ask, and that is so true. As I went through that material there, a book that further focuses his thought is Black Labor, White Wealth. I think these two should be reversed, where because white wealth, I have found out, rests on black labor. And he gives a lot of facts and examples about that in America, stemming from slavery, of course. And his plan, his national plan, bring blacks together to as a community so that we can compete with the Hispanics, with the Asians, with the whites. Right now, we really don't. And we can't be as open as those groups about being segregated, about being exclusive in their communities. Blacks are denied that. So it's very sad how that dynamic plays out. But I'm hoping to nudge us a little bit. I don't expect to see people on the streets like back in Dr. King's day. It's a new day where it's electronics, instant information, and the communities are all online now. Right, so I don't expect to see too much physical change and demonstrating like that. Dr. Anderson is going to. A lot of his work shows us that is ineffectual. It doesn't work. It doesn't get the results that they did back in King's day. He also informs us that Dr. King's legacy, civil rights, social integration, and things like that really came up short and really uh, is a failure in many ways. And when it comes to um, having blacks be placed in a position of equality, moving just as unhindered in American society as some of these other groups that are competing with us and that have actually overran us in numbers and economically. It's very, it's very involved. I want you to get those books if you can. You can get them at you can, type in powernomics.com, go to a place called Heritage Institute. You can find these books and read them. He also has two book series, so it's more dirty little secrets about America or something like that. Behind me, you see the hashtag #US2. Type that into your browser. That'll help you navigate, find a community. This community in particular, black folks coming together. Easy to find on Facebook as well. If you're there on Facebook, type in hashtag #US2, and you'll get more insight of individuals probably articulating this material or the subject of this material much better than myself. And finally, Uncle Tom's Cabin. I'd like everybody to get a copy of this. Um, I got this copy in very devious ways. It was used, but it had not been written in, and it hadn't much wear on it. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got this book and how I might start getting books I really like. I'm probably not the only one that does it, but I can't say too much about it yet. I'm going to feel you out a little bit. But actually, Uncle Tom's Cabin is our subject in this short time. This is we're going to talk in chapter 1. Yesterday, I talked about this actually being a series of articles that appeared in a publication called the National Era. Began June 5th, 1851, and finished the series a year later. And the author, Harriet Beecher Stow, compiled it into a book. And when it came out and started circulating, it was number 2 best-selling book at that time after the Bible. So a lot of people got a hold of it, wanted to read it. A lot of innovations in theater and acting. Blackface comes from heavily influenced by this work, and we're going to see a lot of other aspects. I'm bringing this book out, this book of fiction. I want to maybe lighten things up a little bit, but also switch gears, but also show you how there's elements of this book that can be found in today's society. This is mid 1800s. Now it's 2019. Yet the impact of this book, impact of slavery, white dominance, uh, Euro-centered life is still ongoing. And for white folks, it just continues to spiral upward exponentially, you know. But for black folks, it just essentially runs flatline unless you are doing well as a business person or you're an entertainer, which includes sports. I was musing on blacks as entertainers, and that includes, to me now, it includes your local news, any black folks you see there. And I say that because, and I agree with Dr. Anderson's thought, is that any black that is no threat to the white power is just an actor, an entertainer. They may be doing something for blacks on the side somewhere or whatnot, but they're not outspoken. They can't be outspoken people to be advocates specifically for black people. And the American system does not tolerate that, and it's quickly squashed, and they would probably lose those prominent positions that they have. I just asked Colin Kaepernick, former quarterback of the San Francisco 49ers. Let's get into the text. I'm actually an introvert. I don't talk much if you're around me. But now it's just me doing a monologue. I find myself unable to stop talking. So here we go. The book, it's Uncle Tom's Cabin, but then there's also a subtitle that goes along with that. Let me see if I can find it quickly. It's something like Uncle Tom's Cabin or Life Among the Lowly is the title. I'll try to hopefully maybe update you on that later on, which is true in a lot of ways. Life Among the Lonely and Lowly, and we will find that's true as we are introduced to characters and situations throughout the book. So I'm not going to read the book. I'm just going to give you highlights of some notes. That's things that interest me. You get the book, and you'll find highlights and things that interest you. Like there could be women's issues and all that. Plenty of issues, but we're talking about blacks and black folks here. So it opens up. Tom's master and a slave trader are talking. Apparently, Tom has already been sold, and the prevailing direction for slaves, from what I get from the book, is that slaves are sold and they go further south. You keep going deeper south. It's almost like there's a better slavery up north, whatever the cutoff line is, before those northern colonies started to abolish slavery. And then as you go further south, slavery gets harder and harder. You can think like a person gets older or a female is past childbearing age. And we're going to see some of those scenarios. They get sold further south. You go further south, then they work you to death, right? No pension plan, no retirement, health care, all that. White folks get that kind of thing. The black folks uh, just worked and worked and worked, So Tom, his handler, and Tom's master are going over his paperwork now, and then this speaks as well, like the slaves are property, and they're gainful property, and the real heyday, the peak of slavery. Buying and selling a slave could go upwards of $1,800. Now that's quite an investment to think. You think you get a young man, you invest $1,800, that young man's going to give you, another good hard 30 years of back-breaking labor. That's quite an investment to make. They're getting all that, and they get all the proceeds. They give the slave just enough to crawl out of bed and break their back in the fields the next day. Saw a movie, Danny Glover was in it, and I guess this was shortly after slavery, Jim Crow laws, black codes were coming in. We'll talk about some of those things if they're not familiar to you. They were new to me when I understood them, but he's in it. I think Sally Fields is in it too, but Sally Fields owns a cotton field or something, and she wants to sell her cotton to save the farm. Classic farm plot. And Danny Glover is the slave, and she's trying to tell her, we got only so much time, and when getting this cotton is not going to be easy. You're going to tear some fingers up on this, and I think I saw a picture one time of a former slave's fingers, how they were heavily calloused, cut, bulging there, because the cotton comes in a pod, and that pod, when the cotton is ready to be harvested, sometimes the pod, hopefully it's broken open. I don't know what their standards were for getting the cotton, but even if it's broken open, that pod itself, there's like maybe four um, leaves that hold the pod. It dries. This thing is like a knife if you're out there all day trying to get this cotton. You need some specific techniques to draw that out. So anyway, that's where they went. The slaves are going further south to the cotton fields. I used to drive truck across the country, and I saw fresh cotton fields down south. And even at that time, I thought about the slave. So the slave master, the slave handler are talking about Tom's sale, but the back to the slave's property. This slave master apparently he owes more money than just Tom. And while they're having this conversation, a young boy named I think his name is Harry comes in. Yeah, Harry comes in and does some performances, and the slave handler's like, "Yo, I want him too. We could clear your whole debt up. We'll erase this whole thing, put him on the table." And the slave master, tries to deny it, but the slave handler talks him into it. And in the meantime, Harry's mother, and she's what's called a quadroon. Quadroon is a person with 1/4 black ancestry. So she's a very fair woman, nearly white, probably, and also Harry, because of the interaction between the slave master and slave women, and they have relations and children and all that stuff. Quadroons, you see the quad, so this person is a quarter. There were also mulattoes and octoroon. See, octo is 8, so this person is 1/8 black ancestry. As that's that little teaching moment there for you. Um, so they're talking about selling Tom, and religion comes up, and the slave master says how pious Tom is, and it's a safe investment because Tom's got essentially God's Jesus, and he's very humble with God and stuff like that. This slave handler actually likes that aspect of Tom's personality, and says the slaves that are religiously educated or have a religious pious leaning are easier to handle, things like that. Um, so in the midst of that, Harry comes in. Harry does a little thing. The slave owner wants him. The slave handler wants Harry as well to clear up this debt. And eventually, he talks the slave owner into putting Harry with the deal. Harry's mother hears this she's not sure if she heard it specifically, but she's really upset. And she goes to her mistress, the slave master's wife, and um, you want, and she wants assurances that Harry is not part of this deal. And the mistress, she doesn't know what's going on. And women didn't have that kind of power back then. But she assures her slave, the slave girl, the mulatto slave girl, that Harry is not, won't be sold. She's saying all kinds of stuff, but she's really busy getting ready for something. She's just talking, try to assuage her slave's concerns about her son. Um, in this first chapter, the slave handler talks about separating the slave, especially the mother, from the children, and there's how there's weeping and wailing, distress, and tells a story of one girl goes mad to the point where she just dies after her child is separated from her. And, in the days of slavery, family separation was just the same way we do with animals. And I believe animals feel something. Hope maybe one day we'll get some technology or get to the point to have some compassion around that. But right now, we take dogs and cats and birds and stuff, with disregard. Well, it's the same way that the slave masters handled the slaves. They were just animals. The Constitution had them at 3/5 of a human being anyway. They weren't even slaves. Were not fully human. Um, so the agitation and the wailing that came with separating families, were just seen as temporary signs. The slave will get over it and all that, while the white power establishment had their secure homes and their close-knit families. It talks about here in the first chapter as well. The slave handler had a friend, um, had a good friend of his who was another slave handler, and he would he would beat the slave women and get them to shut up. When their um, children were being taken away. This guy, the other guy's name was Tom Loker, and but the slave handler that's talking to the master at this time is like, what a waste of energy and time and stuff like that. Um, that happens there in the first chapter. Um, Near the end, after the characters move and it's just kind of, there's a point where we're left with the slave master. His name is Mr. Shelby, and he's just at ease now. This handler is going to come back tomorrow with the money to collect Tom and little Harry to take further south. And with the deal set, the slave master is quite comfortable. He's just agreed to separate a little boy from his mother, and he's agreed to sell Tom down the river. That's, if you think about terms like, sold you down the river or threw you under the bus, this may be the kernel of where that came from. Now also, it wasn't clear here earlier, but I think I can be a kind of a spoiler. May come out more in the second chapter. I forget. But Tom has a family too. Now this is his original family. Now back in slavery days, what the slave master, what the thought was like, if I took the man, I'm taking the man and his labor and getting a lump sum for that, selling him down the river. Wherever he ends up, if he's still healthy and able, he's going to be paired up with another female and another family. And he's going to be commanded to make that happen. Meanwhile, his former wife, marriage obviously not being a sacred thing for slaves, only for whites, but Tom's former wife and his former children, they're still wife and child, but he's gone now. And that female, that woman and those children are going to now be commanded. What was the practice of the day was that she was going to be commanded to accept this new black man into her life, and those children were going to see the black man as their father. And this comes out today. I personally, I don't like divorce. I don't like that black people don't get together, and we're going to stick with Uncle Tom's Cabin. But I'm all for the ideal circumstance of a man and woman being joined, staying committed to being together, and we're too okay with divorce. And for black people, this problem is exponentially problematic, meaning it's a compound problem, because for blacks to divorce and have families and such, and this is true in my family. I love all of y'all. Do anything for you. What I'm talking about, what's the best? What would be ideal? You know, I think everybody's got to come through their personal walk with that. But getting back, understanding the context of slavery, white power, black struggle, is that we continue to perpetuate a certain system. If this divorce and hooking up and all this stuff, I'm glad we make it work in the long run, but there's portions and pieces of that that fit well into making white people stronger, white people more appealing, white life looking better. You know, my mother and father divorced, but they had to. There were some certain stressors in there, alcohol being a big one. And, you know, I've actually talked with my mother about that. So that could be traced all the way back to slavery, right? Um, but I wish black people would do better in this area. This would be an area where we could begin to come back and dig ourselves out with intact family units rising up, being strong. Most, you know, divorce is common across all cultures, peoples, languages, and whatnot, but you'll see, in my opinion, I've not seen the numbers, but white people seem to do better with it. So that's the thing, like, so, or I say it's exponential because it's just common practice for for the white master to separate the slave. So, you know, how much of our divorce is because we can't get along versus um, perpetuating an idea that white society places on us. Some things to think about. No judgment, but just more things to think about. If the black community is going to come together, some things are going to have to stay. Some things, some ideas, family, things like that needs to come together and stay together. Have in-depth conversations before making any commitments. If there's red flags, then don't go forward. If there's some issues, something not right, a question you don't feel you can ask a certain question about something, then you may want to think twice about making that person a lifelong partner. I've had, since I've read some of this stuff, I'm thinking more, although I don't have a significant other in my life right now. So by the end, the first chapter ends with Eliza. That's Harry's mother. She's the mulatto woman who is afraid that her little son Harry will be sold, and her mistress, Mrs. Shelby, the master's wife, puts her at ease, or is she at ease? This is a mother. Mothers have intuition. Mothers have a sense of these things. So we're going to, every once in a while, we'll come and we'll check in with Uncle Tom, see how he's progressing along with us in our 365-day challenge towards racial change. So the call to action for you today, do something different racially, even if it's just being aware of how what you're doing, why you're doing it, fits into a predominantly white American power structure and its possible roots in slavery. Thanks. Please stick around, and I'll see you hopefully tomorrow. Bye-bye.